Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present to our students in the name of designing and maintaining a conducive environment to maximize productivity and participation for all. I am Dr. Maite E Maebana from Department of Inclusive Education. The presentation is structured as follows. We will have the learning outcomes, introduction, creating a conducive environment for people with disabilities, things that can hinder participation in the environment, and the last section will be our conclusion. Our learning outcomes are as follows. At the end of this presentation, students should be able to design and maintain a conducive environment to maximize productivity and participation for all. Without wasting much of our time, we're saying, according to Smith and Bell, 2015, what constitutes an inclusive environment is the complexities of aspects influencing a roadmap rather than a set of institutional instructions only. Therefore, the concept of environment involves a holistic concentration on the person as an individual and the total sum of his or her circumstances. Making the environment conducive implies, among other things, taking appropriate measures to create accessibility for all on an equal basis. This includes persons with disabilities in a natural environment where educational settings are offered, and persons with disabilities and those at the risk of exclusion can be functionally and socially excluded to participate when the environment is conducive. Let's just take a look at the following pictures here. We can see that, let's assume this gentleman in the middle of the learners is a teacher. So he's trying by all means to involve everybody in participating. Everybody or all learners are carefully taking care of what is actually taking place here. So no one or nobody is excluded from the activities that are taking place. And the conducive environment then serves as the enabling mechanism or system to facilitate and maximize participation for all. If you can look at this particular gentleman, he is facilitating the entire learning process, and everybody is actively involved. So the complexities of the environment encompass the plan and the toolkit towards optimal participation and productivity. Therefore, an environment involves much more than providing a physical environment for persons with disabilities or those at the risk of exclusion and those who experience barriers to learning. And as a result of this, we're saying an accessible environment is also the key element of maximizing human potential and quality education, which involves much more than placement in a particular setting. And now we are going to focus on another section which says creating and maintaining a conducive environment involves the following. The first item under this section is learning and support material. The current position with regards to access of learning and teaching support material in South African schools reflects our apartheid past. So the government, in addressing and eliminating these inequalities of the past, has invested hugely in equal provisioning of textbooks, and other essential learning teacher support material resources. And the key objective as per Goal 19, as stated in the Vision 2030 document, is to ensure that each learner has access to quality learning and teaching material to meet the requirements of the curriculum and improve learner performance. The second one, that is the physical space. This refers to an accessible learning environment, in other words, an appropriate place and work area that is suitable for using large braille books as well as equipment. The third aspect is on presentation. This encompasses the accessibility of material when teaching. The teacher must provide accessible learner support material in a format and medium accessible and suitable to the learner. For instance, low vision learners that have a narrow field of vision are actually hindered if they are given enlarged text on which they can see fewer letters at a glance. And now we get into experience. Under experience, we're saying this refers to accessible learning experiences. The teacher must set a standard for the class and not for individuals. And these standards must not be compromised to accommodate the learner who is visually impaired. However, in order to reach the set standards, the other two concepts, that is integration and inclusivity, must be adhered to avoid unrealistic expectation by the teacher. Expectations ensuing from a compromised teaching and learning situation cannot be realized. In other words, the teacher must ensure that a blind learner is able to participate in life science activities. Giving information. This refers to accessible information, and the teacher is the main source of information. It is the primary responsibility of the teacher to mediate between the world of information and the persons with disabilities. In a nutshell, this means a teacher must bring the wealth of information to a visually impaired learner, or the teacher must lead, guide, and support the visually impaired learner to reach and access the world of information. Speed of working, which is found to be the last section in this area. This refers to an accessible pace. Therefore, reading Braille one character at a time is just as time consuming for a person with low vision, as well as finding a place in a book or reading one part of a diagram at a time. And the following section will focus on how to create a conducive environment for persons with disabilities. The first item on this section, that is care for every student. The teaching and learning needs of every learner with or without disabilities matter in an inclusive classroom. Therefore, the experience, knowledge, skills and attitudes, capacities, possibilities, as well as mentoring needs of each student have to be considered. For the students with developmental disabilities in the classroom, teachers have to look at each student as a unique individual with unique potentials, familiarities, abilities, points of view, and guidance needs. And the student with developmental disabilities must be viewed from the perspective of an inimitable individual who only happens to be part of the class. And the learner has to contribute on how, when, and what to learn, although this perception can raise some heated debate. And the interest of the learner needs to be examined. Hence, the inclusive classroom teacher has to consider the uniqueness of the student and special being, and the teaching and learning intentions. Intentions are generally referred to as aims, goals, and objectives. As Rosenthal 2006 argues that teachers must have clear, written out objectives for each learner. Inclusive classroom teachers have to consider aspects such as the capabilities, previous knowledge, skills, and interest of the students. To cater for the unique needs of the students with developmental disabilities, the IEP is an imperative tool. That is the individual education plan. In the IEP, long and short-term goals are set by the teacher, and the intentions or the goals have to be adopted to suit the individual students. It must be noted that set goals have to set realistic targets for the learners. And this is important to find out if any progress towards the achievement of set goals and objectives is being made. If no progress is made, the IEP has to be modified or even discarded altogether to come up with a realistic one, according to Big and Stamp 1999. When every student achieves the set objectives, they feel motivated to achieve more. An emphasis must be put on a clear idea of what they will be learning and what the assignments are, as some students usually have problems articulating complex situations as one of their characteristics. And failure to do this may easily confuse them. And we get into curriculum content. Under curriculum content, we're saying inclusive education calls for a shift from the traditional way of teaching all children the same content to teaching every child as an individual. And the curriculum of a student with a disability must be relevant to his or her needs. And there must therefore be curriculum reforms that aim at making learning appropriate to students' life capacity and needs. And the content of what the learner with a developmental disability has to learn is in an inclusive classroom must be related to the goals, the aims, and the objectives referred to as the intentions above. Aspects such as level of mastery of the child, interests, needs, strength, weaknesses, learning barriers, and fears have to be considered to provide relevant curriculum to individual students with disabilities. And the inclusive classroom teacher must be prepared to adapt the individual children's learning outcomes, equipments, and teaching aids and methods that he or she uses to assess the teaching or learning outcomes based on the philosophy that difference is positively valued and celebrated. Although these perceptions may be shot down in situations where the inclusive classroom teacher is faced with a lack of resources, coupled with a burden of a ballooned teacher-student ratio efforts must be made according to the individual student needs. And students with disabilities need to be part of the education systems through the pursuance of the national curriculum like everyone else. However, inclusive classroom teachers need to be aware that all curriculum adaptations have to be in tandem with the national curriculum. And the national curriculum of each level has to be taken into consideration to come up with the individual one. Even the curriculum content planned at the macro level must be considered with flexibility at the micro level. And teachers must realize that the curriculum is meant for the learners and not the students for the curriculum. And the inclusive classroom teacher must do more than just simply follow a fixed and prescribed curriculum, as individual needs determine the curriculum needs of the individual student. Therefore, the teachers have to adapt curriculum content to suit individuals with disabilities in the inclusive classroom. And the individual curriculum content must enable every child with a disability to implement the acquired knowledge in the community, hence enabling functionality in everyday life. Some curricula present some rigidity, leaving no room for flexibility. And we come into another section, which is known as communication. Teaching learners with developmental challenges in an inclusive, regular classroom brings challenges in communication channels. Therefore, teachers need to have open communication channels with the students. The learners need to dialogue freely with teachers about their education in inclusive classrooms. They need to share with the teachers their experiences and capabilities in inclusive classrooms. While language delay is one of the characteristics of learners with disabilities, communication problems have to be minimized by using various communication channels. A language that is understood by the learner has to be used, with the mother tongue regarded as the best to use, as the vernacular language contains students to new concepts as they find it easy to understand and manipulate other concepts. Teaching students with developmental disabilities in inclusive classrooms requires teachers to express their genuine feelings about all children in the classrooms. And students with developmental disabilities need to be given the message that they are students first, with developmental disabilities later. And teachers need to develop feeling of ability to cope with diversity. And positive attitudes may enable inclusive classroom teachers to become prepared mentally and emotionally to give every child adequate support. The inclusive classroom teacher must therefore be prepared to welcome learners with developmental disabilities as full members of the class by conveying clear messages of accepting them to the inclusive classroom. And teachers need to develop positive perceptions and attitude of inclusion of students with developmental disabilities. And positive attitude and perceptions of the inclusive classroom teachers may enable them thoroughly plan for all learners in the inclusive classroom, including those with developmental disabilities. For the inclusion of children with developmental disabilities to be a reality, communication with parents as active partners should be regarded as crucial to achieve the successful inclusion of students with developmental disabilities. And parents have to be involved actively in inclusion, and they have to be involved in activities such as program planning as well as evaluation. And parents may provide important information such as the interests, knowledge, and skills of the students that they may assist the inclusive classroom teachers decide what and how to teach the students. And another section is on the teaching methods. Where inclusive classroom teachers lack the necessary teaching methods, there may be challenges in the inclusion practices. As a way of celebrating individual differences, individual learning methods needs to be considered, as no method is so complete that is fit for all peoples. This simply indicates to us that a variety of methods needs to be used. As we're saying, there is no method which is ever technically correct, and there is no single method that can fit on all the learners. Teachers need to be aware that learners are unique individuals who learn in unique ways through unique methods. And the learning strategies and media of instruction have to be considered at individual level. And if students are different individuals, then they need different learning techniques. Therefore, inclusive classroom teachers need to be flexible to cater to the diversity of students through appropriate teaching programs, organizations, and other adaptations that are necessary for individual students. They need to work with all learners at their instructional levels. And students with developmental disabilities need to be taught and not as a class, while lessons have to be presented in clear and structured ways. Therefore, many teachers may face hurdles to focusing on individual needs in their teaching methods. If the teacher-people ratio in the regular classroom is too large, then focusing on relevant teaching method for specific students with developmental disabilities may become a problem. And individualized teaching may be a problem in countries where regular classroom teachers have to cope with large class sizes due to prevailing poor economies and other reasons that subsequently make hiring additional teachers a challenge. In such situations, solutions must be found to reduce teacher-people ratios by mitigating the constraints to pay extra teachers or employ class assistants. Regular classroom teachers need training to equip them with a more diverse students population. With enough training and preparation, teachers may be geared to teach each and everyone in accordance with their needs as individuals and as members of the class. And regular classroom teachers need to be aware of appropriate teaching methods for the specific individual students and how to use those methods effectively. And teachers need to adapt materials to the individual students' teaching and learning needs. And let's look at things that can hinder participation in the environment. we say numerous factors determine participation levels in the classroom and needs to be taken into account when determining a strategy that will encourage an active learning environment and therefore raise levels of participation. Let's look at the student traits. As individuals, we differ in personalities, and not everybody is the same. And confidence is a key trait that students struggle with and has a direct effect on participation. Students deal with fears of not being smart enough to address their class and therefore hold back on providing insights on the subject matter due to intimidation, anxiety, and nervousness, independent of classroom logistics, inhibit students from communicating instead of building their confidence through participation. And research has shown that this is linked to classroom apprehension, which is defined by NIR as the avoidance of participation prompted by evaluation, apprehension, or expectations of negative outcomes associated with participation. And Wade 1994 noted that students will only engage in class if they feel that what they have to say is important and interesting. The second one, that is preparation for class. Fear is an issue many students face as they may not have sufficient knowledge and may be dealing with insecurities in the classroom. Research has shown that some students reported to not be participating in classes if they did not prepare on the subject matter prior to coming to class, and therefore did not feel comfortable engaging in discussion. And we're saying preparation is very much important. Even teachers, before you get into the classroom, make sure that you have a thorough preparation, or you have thoroughly prepared yourself to avoid disappointments. Yes, it's true that some of the students are skilled enough and they come to class well prepared in advance before the teacher may present his lesson. Students worried that they would be criticized by both their peers and professors for not being well informed on their subject matter. And classroom size, logistics of the classroom do matter and affect the classroom participation. Logistics such as overcrowding. In some of the areas, we're finding out that the size of the class is so big in the sense that the teacher meets or see a new face on daily basis. The teacher who's offering English, for an example, does not know some of the learners. They happen to see a new face on daily basis. Classroom size has been shown to have a direct and indirect impact on participation. And in small classroom, higher levels of participation have been recorded due to the students being more comfortable in an intimate classroom setting and therefore have less anxiety. And in continuation, we're saying larger classroom promote anonymity among students and raise the level of fear as they now have to contribute in front of a larger crowd, which could result in a larger amount of disapproval from peers. As Oster and Macron 1994 argued that classrooms with over 40 students had low participation rates. And this was later supported by Weaver and Q 2005 by adding that classrooms with over 40 students did not have a sufficient amount of time allocated to discussions due to lectures and therefore limited the extent to which students could contribute to the discussion and ultimately raise participation levels. And we get into another one, that is grading. We're saying grading is an effective method that can be used to increase levels of participation. If participation has a positive impact on students' grade, they are more likely to participate in classrooms discussions. And Bonicki and More, 2003, suggested that offering extra credit might be a better way to reward participation versus giving it a separate grade. Their findings supported this argument. In determining how often to access a student participation, Denser and Gamvonius 2005 found that a mid-semester grade would be most effective in providing students with a concrete performance indicator in terms of their participation. And this would allow them the opportunity to take action and improve for the rest of the semester. In conclusion, we're saying participation is an important piece in a student's education and the achievement of positive learning outcomes. And the benefits includes developing their communication skills, becoming critical thinkers, demonstrating that they understand the curriculum and can develop valid arguments in dialogue with their peers. And a conducive environment is critical after the advocacy campaign. Now that people have been mobilized, a conducive environment must be created to cater to those persons who were marginalized and excluded. And it would be self-defeating to just place persons with disabilities in an environment that is completely inaccessible and where there is no material in the accessible format for learners who experience barriers to learning. And the environment for these learners must be in